Let's face it, nothing breaks the heart like badly cooked beef. Fear not, though. These tips and tricks will help you rustle up beef tenderloin like the best of them. If you say tenderloin, most people will assume you're talking about beef. But steers aren't the only animals with a tenderloin muscle. Your average butcher shop or meat counter is also likely to offer pork tenderloin and even chicken tenderloin, otherwise known as chicken tenders. Both of these meats are exactly as tender as their name suggests. But even if you zero in on beef from the get-go, there are a few missteps you can make at the starting line. First off, it's important to know the difference between beef tenderloin and filet mignon. The latter is the tenderest part of the tenderloin, located at the very end of the muscle, and is generally the most sought-after part of the cut. It's usually more expensive than other cuts of beef and can also be confused with other, less tender beef fillets if you don't examine the packaging carefully. Even after you found the right cut in the butcher case, there are a few things you can check for to ensure you've got the best of the best. Matthew Creeder, executive chef of Steak 954, suggests, always buy your steaks from someone you trust. I prefer not to buy mine from big-name grocers. Find a butcher or a grocer with a good program that can tell you where your steak is coming from. Meanwhile, Aki Suzuki, general manager of American Cut, notes that you can guarantee an even more flavorful steak by looking for a bright red color with fine marbling. Once you've found the perfect steak, it's time to get cooking, right?
I'm gonna fire up the grill and all set.
Well, not quite. Depending on where you bought your beef tenderloin, it may require a bit of trimming first. Often, beef tenderloin is sold already cleaned or even sliced into medallions ready for cooking. But a whole beef tenderloin includes not just the tenderloin itself, but also a fair amount of silver skin and excess fat, not to mention the chain muscle. All of this must be trimmed before cooking. If you've got the whole thing, about 30% of the tenderloin will need to be removed before you even start cooking. Obviously, that may seem like a lot of extra work, as well as quite a bit of waste for a cut that tends to sell for a whopping $30 a pound. But don't even think about throwing these valuable pieces of meat away. While they might not cook up quite like beef tenderloin, there's loads of flavor in these trimmings. The chain muscle can be chopped and sautéed to be enjoyed in steak fajitas, or a Chinese takeout-inspired beef and broccoli stir-fry, for example, while the other trimmings can be used to make stock, broth, or ground into burger meat. Lean beef trimmings also provide a decent start for your next sauce. Consider using them to make a rich, delicious no-drippings gravy to serve with your tenderloin, or cooking them down into a luscious au jus. Once you've trimmed the tenderloin, there's another essential step required to get it ready for cooking: tempering. Many chefs agree that beef is happiest when cooked not from fridge temperature, but rather from room temperature. This helps ensure even doneness throughout. While the thought process behind tempering beef certainly makes sense, not all experts are in agreement about it. A little while back, Serious Eats tested this theory by bringing one steak to room temperature before cooking it and cooking another from fridge temperature. They found that it barely made a difference to the doneness of each. And if you ask the USDA, from a food safety perspective, you never want to leave any meat out of the fridge for longer than 2 hours. So when it comes to this tempering tip, feel free to follow our experts' advice if you like. But if you forget, don't worry too much. Depending on how you're cooking your beef tenderloin, you may want to break out the butcher's twine before getting started. Aki Suzuki points out that tying your roast will help it cook evenly, though adds that this method is only really necessary if you're cooking the tenderloin as a whole roast. He says, for filet mignon, tying is usually unnecessary unless you want to maintain a perfect round shape. That said, Matthew Creeder says that a more uniform shape isn't just about aesthetics. He claims that a nice round shape can also contribute to a more uniform cook, adding, you can cook these steaks without it. However, it can be a nice touch. So how do you go about this? You'll want to tie loops about every inch using one continuous strand of butcher's twine. It can take a bit of time to get the hang of it, so it's best to rely on an expert like Martha Stewart, who has a great video showing you how to manage this at home.
So this is how you do it. Isn't that nice and neat?
If you find yourself at a loss, a good butcher should be able to take care of this step for you, which is all the more reason to seek out a top-notch vendor when sourcing your beef tenderloin. Beef tenderloin is a very tender steak, of that you can be sure. But as is often the case, its tenderness is inversely related to its richness and flavor. To put it bluntly, beef tenderloin can be a bit blander than some of its more marbled cousins. As a result, it's even more important to get a lovely brown char on the outside of the steak than it is with other cuts of beef, as the Maillard reaction will help bring out even more of its flavor. The one thing that has the potential to get in your way? Moisture. Vanessa Parrish, private chef and executive director of Queer Food Foundation, nutrition, explains, "You do not want that layer of moisture between the sear and the steak. It causes that moisture to evaporate once it hits the skillet and can turn your steak gray. I hate to see a steak lose that nice crust opportunity, so be sure to pat your steak dry thoroughly with paper towels before cooking it, or do as Matthew Creeder does, and go one step further." He says, "I like to air dry my steaks overnight so they get a much nicer crust. This can easily be done by placing the steak on a rack set over a baking dish and setting it in the fridge overnight." Beef tenderloin is a relatively lean cut, which means that it can be a heart-healthy choice. But from a flavor standpoint, if you're looking to bring out all of its richness, adding a bit of fat never hurts.
Butter.
While Matthew Creeder claims that you don't need a lot of fat to cook tenderloins, he does note that finishing with a bit of fat adds loads of flavor. He says, "I love to baste mine in some brown butter with a garlic clove and thyme, and gilding the lily with a round of compound butter is a great way to push its tastiness up to 11. Kayleen Gusso, executive chef at Lafayette Steakhouse in Miami, Florida, agrees. He says, "Since these cuts are very lean, it is advisable to add some fat, such as butter or oil, to prevent them from drying out during cooking and to enhance their flavor. Personally, I love using butter to enhance the rich flavor of the steak. But while butter may well be the perfect finishing fat, it's actually not the best choice when it comes to cooking the steak itself. For that, you'll want to use a fat that can stand fairly high temperatures, such as canola or avocado oil. These fats have a high enough smoke point to achieve the perfect sear on your steak without burning it." The last essential element when it comes to getting the perfect crust on the outside of your steak is the temperature at which you cook it. Cooking beef at a fairly high temperature is the best way to get a lovely browned exterior, explains Matthew Creeder. This goes especially when it comes to leaner steaks like tenderloin, which are easier to overcook than fattier steaks such as ribeye. Creeder says, "I always cook leaner steaks like this quickly so as not to overcook them and to get a nice sear." Aki Suzuki agrees, noting that he prefers a double-barreled approach when cooking beef tenderloin. He suggests, start with a high temperature to sear and create a crust, then finish at a lower temperature, in the oven, to ensure even cooking. Using a cast iron skillet is probably the best approach here, as they are known for their ability to retain high temperatures. Given the mild flavor of beef tenderloin, it's essential to season it well with salt and pepper. As a rule of thumb for seasoning steak, a tablespoon of salt for every pound of meat is a good bet. But when should you do this? Some prefer to season their meat, hours or even 2 days in advance. This approach ensures that the salt will penetrate the crust and into the meat itself. But if you haven't had time to season quite that far in advance, be warned, there's a window where seasoning early can actually cause you problems. By and large, if you season up to 40 minutes before cooking, you're probably in the clear. Any later than that, however, and seasoning early will only bring moisture to the surface of the meat, making it difficult for the perfect brown crust to form. If you haven't had a chance to season your beef tenderloin well in advance, it's best to season just before cooking. No one likes overcooked steak, but it's particularly unappealing when it comes to beef tenderloin, since the cut's lack of fat can make it doubly dry if too well done. And to add insult to injury, its lack of fat makes beef tenderloin even more susceptible to accidental overcooking than many other cuts of steak. Matthew Creeder says, "It can be extremely easy to overcook these steaks. There is not a lot of fat in them, so they will cook faster and rest further than, let's say, a strip loin or a ribeye. You can use a meat thermometer to gauge whether beef has reached the ideal medium-rare temperature, 130 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Vanessa Parrish offers another suggestion, though, cooking tenderloin as a roast, which she says can be more forgiving than cooking them from start to finish in a pan. Once you've cooked beef tenderloin to perfection, it can be tempting to dig right in. Resist that urge, though. It's essential that any cooked steak rests before carving to ensure that the juices can redistribute inside the meat. Matthew Creeder tells us, "Always rest your steaks. Please always rest your steaks. Your steak deserves it. You deserve it. It will be so much more tender and juicier if you let it rest." As for how long to rest your meat, Aki Suzuki recommends at least 5 to 10 minutes, though the actual time can depend on the size of the steak. Thinner cuts can rest for a mere 5 to 7 minutes, while thicker steaks and roasts may need to rest 10 minutes or up to 20. As a rule of thumb, Creeder recommends a resting time of between a third and half of the original cook time. Tenting steak loosely with foil will keep it from going cold without allowing too much moisture to build up and softening that crispy crust you worked so hard to develop. While the steak rests, you've got just enough time to whip up a delicious sauce. Purists may scoff, but a top-notch sauce can push the flavors of mild-mannered beef tenderloin to total perfection. Matthew Creeder even terms this particular steak a sauce sponge, noting that a wide variety of sauces can suit it perfectly. Some of the best sauces to serve with beef tenderloin are pan sauces, which take full advantage of all of the flavorful fond left in the bottom of the pan after cooking. Bring up this fond using cognac for the beginnings of a classic au poivre sauce, or use red wine and cook it down by half before emulsifying it with butter to make a tasty red wine reduction.
You know what? I am gonna have that third steak after all. Go ahead and put that order in now, please and thank you.
But pan sauces aren't your only option. Horseradish-infused creme fraiche is a classic sauce to serve with roast beef that goes just as well with beef tenderloin, while a classic béarnaise sauce adds all the richness this steak needs to take it to the next level. If you want something a bit lighter, an Argentinian-inspired chimichurri complete with fresh herbs and acid can be the perfect pairing.